3, 2, 1.
Hi, I'm Jim Eskin, and on behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my privilege to welcome you to our nonprofit webinar empowerment series. This is number 42. When I think of that number 42, I think of the great Jackie Robinson, who I really count as a huge hero. Before we get into a fuller discussion with our guests, what comes to mind is something Michelle Obama said once, that people, no matter how different they are, when they walk into the room, they bring with them, I guess, in person or virtually nowadays, but three commodities. They bring their values, they bring their vision, and they bring the sum of their life experiences. It's my privilege to welcome a cherished friend and colleague who does amazing work in combining and blending her vision, her values, and the sum of her life experiences, and blends them so perfectly into a knowing head and an honest heart. And with her, again, amazing vision, values, and some of her life experiences, she became the founding executive director of Nowcast SA, and I believe it was the year 2009. And this is only the latest chapter in her journalistic journey. And so when I'm in the company of an accomplished journalist, I have to ask, before we go any further, Charlotte Ann, welcome. Tell us about your favorite interview.
My favorite interview, slam dunk, was with former Texas Governor Ann Richards. In 1994, she was running for re-election as Texas governor, a race she did not win. And I was able to interview her one-on-one on a single engine plane coming back from McAllen, Texas. So I waited all day in McAllen to get on the plane with her and interview her as we flew back to Austin after a long day that she had spent on the campaign trail. And you know, one of the most remarkable things, besides the fact that I had the opportunity to talk to her one-on-one, was that many of us knew her from her rather infamous one-liners when she said, you know, referring to George Bush Sr. as, you know, poor George, he was had a silver foot in his mouth, and so you think about her like that. But when I interviewed her and I said, tell me about what's the most important thing for business in the Texas economy, how do you improve business? And she said, with education. And she said, and without a well-educated workforce, there is no economy. And she went on to be philosophical for the next 45 minutes. And I was just blown away by how philosophical and committed she was as a very, very well-informed public servant.
I have a follow-up question. When she got off the plane, did she hop on a motorcycle or get into a car?
Actually, I was fairly close friends with her chief of staff, who kept the keys to the motorcycle away from her, so that she could not do that, other than that infamous Texas Monthly cover, which I have framed. So.
Listen, Charlotte Ann, thank you so much for being a wonderful partner of our learning community, because I think nonprofits want to make news. They want to make good news. And so we're going to learn from someone not only that's been a journalist all her career, but for the last 11 years has been one of us, a nonprofit executive and fundraiser.
Right.
So we simply have three objectives, learning objectives. We're going to learn what to do, we're going to learn what not to do, and we're going to learn how to maximize the impact of what we did. And I'd like to bring in one of my esteemed fundraising colleagues, Stephen Silver. Stephen, welcome to the webinar. And what we'd like you to do, 2 assignments. Number one, I know is not going to be difficult. Give us a 30-second or so infomercial about your nonprofit, and then tell us what you would like to know about making news at 5 o'clock that you don't know now.
Okay. My nonprofit is the Children's Rehabilitation Institute, Telethon USA. affectionately known as CRIT. We are a 45,000 square foot facility serving 500 families. And we work with children with neuromuscular and musculoskeletal conditions. Most recently, I wouldn't say recently, it sounds recently, but since last March, we've been doing telemedicine. Matter of fact, my office is a telemed studio, which is why I've been working at a home for the last 10 months, 11 months, and likely for the next couple, at least for the next
How is the
6.
telemedicine going?
Telemedicine's going great. We are, at one point we were serving, I think I reported in the last grant I wrote, we serving 257 families and providing 9,000 different services because we have OTPT, speech therapy. And it's going well, it is. And we do have in clinic, we're down to about 40% of our population in clinic and the balance is telemed. And we found out the telemed really works because we have children with really fragile conditions. And when you think about it, to put the child in the car, undoing the wheelchair, putting it back together again and all of that, it's really provided a whole new avenue for us, and we're going to retain it after COVID, whenever that is.
Okay, and now the second part, tell us what you would like about making the news.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing you say that because we had what we thought was a newsworthy item last 2 weeks ago, and I sent a week and a half ago, and I sent a blurb through the Express News. We were providing snacks for the volunteers at the Alamo Dome. And our volunteers were going to distribute the snacks. And I thought that was kind of cute because there was something in the paper very similar. And we didn't get a tumble. I didn't even get an email back saying, no, it's no good. I want to know what the key is because, you know, very often I'll see another nonprofit profiled that does nothing compared to what we do. And we provide that information. For those on the call, I sound a little egotistical about this, but I'm very passionate about my organization, as all of you are. And that's what I need to know. What gets us noticed? What gets us that little article below the fold on the front page that I've seen some of the others?
Well, we got just the person to help answer that. And by the way, Stephen, thank you for your service and leadership to the community.
Oh, thank you.
And we're going to try to answer that. Before we move ahead, Michael, do we have anybody else that has a question? We could bring them on camera.
So it doesn't look like anybody has raised their hand yet or asked any questions. Do you want me to just explain how that works for everyone?
Yeah, oh, please. And let me introduce, that's right. Michael Argent is our producer. He's with Game Day Media, and he's going to tell you either how you can type in questions in the chat space, but better yet, we want to see your mug. We'd rather have you join us on camera, and Michael's going to explain that. Thanks, Michael.
Sure. So we've got, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom. You can click that and then type in your question, or you can click the raise hand button, and then we'll actually bring you on and you can ask the question with just your voice or your voice and face cam, and Charlotte Ann and Jim will answer it for you. So those are your two options for asking questions.
And Charlotte Ann and I have made a deal. If the question is easy, I'll take it. If it's any bit challenging, she's going to take it. Talking about challenge, we don't have to remind you, these are challenging times for nonprofits. Nonprofits and executive directors like Charlotte Ann have been the world's best at stretching nickels into dimes. And now they're stretching those nickels into quarters. So thank you for the good work you all are doing. And here's some good news. Philanthropy has been amazingly robust. We're beginning to get numbers in. Over the first 9 months of the year, fundraising was actually up 7.6 over a year prior. And of course, Charlene, as a former business reporter, philanthropy closely echoes the stock market. And, I mean, it's just amazing. The stock market goes higher and higher and higher. We've seen a tremendous explosion in a dynamic component of philanthropy called the donor advised fund, where we're going to get some numbers on that. Something called Giving Tuesday hit all sorts of type of records. And then I know you've heard about the movie Wonder Woman, but what happened at the end of last year, Mackenzie Scott gave away about $6 billion to nonprofits around the country, including a 20 million and a 10 million, and I think a $5 million gift right here in San Antonio. And it was money that was completely unrestricted, and it was given all lump sum. I'm going to skip a few slides. Oh, actually, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to quiz Charlotte Ann. There are 1.5 million nonprofits in Texas. About how many do you think are in San Antonio?
6,000.
Okay.
And I admit that
if you're so smart, now I want you to name them. And part of the challenge we face, there's 6,000 nonprofits. What makes you stand out? Because as once explained to me, put yourself in the shoes of the donor. You're not choosing between the good and the bad. You have to choose between the good and the good. And no matter what type of nonprofit you are, our job is to get the donors to know, like, and trust us. And obviously, good PR and media relations can be part of that formula. The overwhelming majority, here you see it, 88% of all those 1.5 million nonprofits, they have budgets under $500,000. But they share this, that passion is the driver for the staff and for the board members and for the volunteers and the donors. And that passion almost is like a superpower. And we have a little tradition at this point. We'd like everybody to type in the words nonprofit strong. Type in the words nonprofit strong. Charlotte Ann, you already knew how many nonprofits there are in San Antonio. What are we?
Nonprofit strong.
We certainly are nonprofit strong. So let me, by the way, I'd like to say that my background started in communications and public relations, and then for the last 30 years, I've been in fundraising. It is one contiguous continuum. No, that's not right. It is one steady continuum. And you can't tell where the communications and fundraising ends and the fundraising begins. They're completely seamless. The better you can tell the story, the more success you're going to have raising money. I'm going to simplify. I was about to say, Charlotte Ann, you've worked in more markets and for more newspapers before Nowcast than I have of those high fancy coat hangers. Okay, so I'm jealous. But I'll tell you what, before we get into our questions, and again, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you, rather than me talk about Nowcast SA, can you give a 1-minute infomercial about Nowcast SA?
So Nowcast SA is a nonprofit news organization. We sometimes compare ourselves to a local C-SPAN because we have done so much back during the in real life days. We did so many webcasts of candidate forums and of civic and cultural events, of 10-hour-long zoning hearings having to do with the Hay Street Bridge. Anyway, we've live streamed almost just an amazing amount of San Antonio's history. And then this past year, we also pivoted to, because we had that expertise, it was not at all any kind of a leap to pivot to helping people do virtual events. And so we did an awful lot of work last year helping people do their own virtual events and did some of our own virtual events as well. But finished up the year with candidate forums and then a wonderful gala with the Poet Laureate of San Antonio.
Wow. Well, listen, she won't brag about herself, but I have to take one highlight that Charlotte Ann is a Pulitzer Prize finalist in public service. So congratulations. That is a tremendous honor. So what do you say? Are you ready to get into a Q&A and help Stephen, all these other people, figure
Absolutely.
how to make their pitches come through? Let's start. I like simplifying things, okay, into their most foundational level. What in your mind rises to the level of being newsworthy?
Well, the whole definition of news is unusual, right? I mean, nothing that's like normal and boring is news. I mean, news has to be something that is unusual. And so, and obviously in the past 4 years, we've kind of taxed our sensibilities about what is unusual. But right now, particularly as we're dealing with, the pandemic and the stresses that has put on our society, the first newsworthy thing having to do with that, most utterly newsworthy thing in San Antonio was those iconic photographs of the lines at the food bank.
And that went viral, didn't it?
That totally went viral, and it went viral because it's not news in a sense that a lot of people in San Antonio suffer food insecurity. I mean, that's already was the case, but that the lines were that remarkably, horrifyingly long, made us all kind of have a sense of how big the problem was.
And it was all captured and told on a lens.
Right, absolutely. It was a photograph.
I'll tell you what, let's now take the flip side of that. What isn't newsworthy?
Well, what's not newsworthy is that things are going fine. Unless I have to say, Stephen, this is really important. Things are going fine with some of the most vulnerable kids in this city, because telemedicine is working and it's working well. And that's a story. I mean, because I think so many people feel like telemedicine is a shabby substitute for the real thing. But in the instances of the children that you're talking about, I think that's a really, really interesting story, that some of these incredibly vulnerable kids for whom, getting them into their wheelchair and getting them out of the wheelchair and into the car and back into the wheelchair and into a provider's office is a traumatic event in itself for those kids. And so here in this instance, telemedicine is actually better for those kids than in real life. That's an amazing story.
Sadie, you don't even have to call a PR firm. Stephen, did you get that? That was wonderful. Hey.
And Stephen, I have to tell you, and I'm going to tell you, like, somebody inside of the Express News, I used to work at the Express News, so I can probably channel them. Somebody inside the Express News looked at your thing about feeding snacks to the people at the Alamo Dome and said, we already did that story. And that's why you didn't get a response. It's so you have to be unusual, and your telemedicine story is unusual.
Wow. Hey, Charlene, I'm afraid I got a question here that too many members of the audience can relate to. What do you do if you got a CEO, an executive director, a board chair, or another nonprofit leader that thinks everything you do, every sneeze is newsworthy?
You can bring me in to talk to them. But here's the really painful, honest to God truth. I told you I used to work at the Express News. When I worked in the Express News from 96 to 99, there were 250 editorial employees at the San Antonio Express News. And that means those are reporters, photographers, editors, copy editors, graphic artists. Those are all editorial employees, right? Today, I'm not sure if there are 100. I think there are probably fewer than 100. And that means that where we once had, 250 people trying to decide what was news, now there are 100 people trying to decide what's news. And so what those people are doing right now is figuring out reasons not to do something because they don't have enough time and they don't have enough talent to do it. So everything that comes in. It's sort of like when you write a grant, right? When you're writing a grant, you have to say to yourself, please let me not inadvertently give the people on the other end of this a reason not to give me the grant. Well, you got to think that same way when it comes to the very, very, very overworked and frankly, yes, underpaid journalists, particularly, you know, at legacy media right now.
Hey, can you repeat that? Not about the media being overworked, but the strategy.
Well, the strategy is really as you just as when you're writing a grant. I mean, people are looking at so many grant proposals, right? I mean, I've been told this a million times over that you know, when you're writing this grant proposal, they're just looking for reasons to say because they have to cull it down. They can only give X amount, right? And that's the same thing at work because of the scarcity of editorial employees, right? Of reporters. They just don't have enough reporters. So what you do better to do, I think, is to try and help those reporters. So if you see that there is a national story about how, I don't know, insurance is going to be really covering telemedicine much more, then Stephen, what you can do is say, hey, you can pitch the Express News and say, you know what, I can help you put a local face on this national story about telemedicine. And they will be so grateful that you saved them the effort of doing something, as opposed to pitch them something that they go, well, I did that yesterday, you know?
Okay, by the way.
I'm glad you're taking notes, Stephen.
Yeah.
I'm here for you.
Diane, we're throwing some big questions at you, okay? And I realize not one size fits all, but that's not going to stop me. What's the best way for nonprofits to inform media contacts about their stories?
Well, for starters, and I think this is hugely, hugely important. First, you need to read the media people or watch the media broadcasts. And if you're not looking at what Vince Davis is writing at the Express News, who writes some of the best human interest stories, if you're not looking at what Elaine Ayala is writing about in her column, if you're not reading them and if you don't know them, then your pitch is going to fall flat because you don't know them. If you're reading their stories and you know that, yes, he's the kind of person who does human interest stories and you think this is a good human interest story, then you can aim your pitch at them. I get a lot of news releases, and sadly, I get a lot of news releases that come hours before a news event, like a news conference, which people continue to call press conferences, and I don't know why, because there's only one outfit in town with a press, and the rest of us don't have presses. But anyway, if you send a generic news release out to everyone, it's not likely to have a whole lot of resonance, particularly if you send it out just hours before some event, because I can't pivot that fast. My staff's too tiny for me to go, oh yes, I think I'll just go cover that at 3 o'clock this afternoon because I have nothing better to do. That doesn't, just like, forget it. I think your better pitch is to try to find the email address of the person who covers this area and try to email that person something that seems personal, and also start out. I mean, Jim, I think one of your guests said this at one of the sessions, perhaps as long as a year ago, and I kept it on my desktop and I use it all the time. And that is that every email should start out with a sentence about them first. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying, my nonprofit is doing yada yada, you might start out a really nice email to that person saying, I loved the column you did last week on such and such.
By the way, I think that's Laura Fredericks, who I think is Tom Brady's the GOAT in football. She is the GOAT in fundraising.
She's wonderful. So, I mean, you can do a news release, but they're impersonal and they're real easy to ignore because they're impersonal.
Yeah. Charlotte Ann, in fundraising, we always talk about building relationships, identifying, building, nurturing relationships. So can nonprofits in the same spirit nurture relationships with reporters, Simon editors, and other media decision makers?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it today it probably is easier for it to go via email, but certainly sending an email to a journalist saying, I paid attention to what you, or I saw what you wrote last week. And even if you're not pitching a story, to say, I really was intrigued with that and would love to talk to you about that. That's probably a really good way of approaching things. I had there's a PR person in town who will go unnamed to protect him, but he called me when I was business editor. And he called at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and he said, hey, Charlotte Ann, I want to talk to you about some story ideas I have. And I just said to him, are you out of your mind? I think I actually perhaps used some language. Anyway, I said, it's 5 o'clock. We're on deadline. I don't have time to talk to you about that crap. Not now. That's the wrong time. Anyway, bless his heart. He sent a huge chocolate chip cookie with like a clock, with the face of a clock and icing on the front of it that said 5 o'clock, and said, I promise to never do that again. And so I continued to take his calls after that. But
you would make a heck of a fundraiser, by the way.
But get to know, reach. I hate the term reach out, but do it. Reach out to people in the media, and we're so flattered when you actually read what we wrote and remember our name. I mean, we're pretty simple,
Repeat that. I think our nonprofit, really repeat that. I think our nonprofit friends, and that's the way board members, right? Can help be ambassadors. But go ahead, repeat that tactic.
Absolutely. I mean, we are. I mean, I was a print reporter for so many years, and it's just that little byline at the top. My face was not, I wasn't on the news. I wasn't a TV person, I was just a print reporter. And so when people actually wrote, and in the old days, they wrote postcards to me. Or letters of paper, and it was like, oh wow, somebody read what I wrote. And I mean, I'm just a little, I'm just like you. It was like, wow, you saw what I did.
Hey, you were about to answer. We're getting into the next question. My mother said, always have a list of no-nos. So what are the no-nos for nonprofits and working with the media?
Okay, so this is really just insane. If I get one more, I just I'm about to pick up the phone and call some people, even inside of some city agencies, and say, just don't even bother sending me a damn news release 4 hours before the event or 8 hours before the event. I can't move that fast. And it kills me, because some of those things are really, really worthy and I'd really like to do it. But, I can't. I just don't have the ability to move that fast. And I don't know anybody in town who really does. So it just annoys us, and it makes me then be less responsive to anything you have to say in the future. So that's one of the biggest. And the other is, I think, sending things that are totally off the mark to different people. I mean, we don't cover some things. We just don't cover car wrecks. We don't cover accidents. We don't cover traffic and stuff like that. And so when I get a pitch from somebody that has to do with that, it's like, wait a minute, you obviously didn't pay any attention to what I do. On the other hand, I have to say, last week when there was the city sweep of the homeless encampment on the freeway, I got an email from one of the people involved in what is the organization that South Texas Homeless Coalition, and his news release was something that I took the time. Billy Mahone sent a news release. He's the South Alamo Regional Alliance for the Homeless, and he sent a news release that said, let me tell you some of the things that are behind what's going on. It's been a difficult week for everyone, but this is really why this sweep happened. It was because people who are in that encampment really felt unsafe. And here it is coming from someone who has such a position of authority, and that really had the potential, and I think it did, change the conversation so that some television journalists picked up on that and covered the situation differently, and as opposed to a very black and white situation. So he did what I was suggesting earlier that you can do, is you can help a journalist see that a story is not just he said, she said, and it's more complex. And most journalists really, I think the journalist for WAI picked up on that complexity and did a TV story with that complexity. I mean, it was wonderful that she said, it's not a very simple, it's not so simple, and so you can really, I think that you can really be helpful by getting in that sweet spot, but you can be very unhelpful and kind of get a reputation if you send things like that to people who that's not what they cover.
You perfectly have led into the next question. I don't want to reveal any numbers, but since I think we've begun our careers, maybe Thomas E. Dewey was running for president at the time, but you mentioned the news release. It amazingly is kind of maintained its position as the key component of a communications toolkit. Can you talk about what to you is a good news release and what to you is a poor news release?
Well, obviously, just calling it a news release is really a number one, because I don't know how people in TV put up with things being called press releases. But
I got lectured on that 45 years ago. I remember my boss lecturing me on that.
But I still
issue. It's not a new issue.
I still get them. So a really good news release tries to, if you're not looking at a specific event, a really good news release tries to tell the story in a compelling way. I mean, go ahead and tell me, this $200,000 grant that you just got from the so-and-so foundation is going to mean hundreds more children are going to have access to blank, 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 blank. I mean, it give me that impact right in the top of it. I mean, impact is important, not just for the donors, but it's also for somebody who's considering whether they want to do this story. And the other thing is make sure you do take care of the who, what, when, where, why, I mean, and if you have to put those in bullets above it, that's fine. And then tell me a nice story. Tell me a story.
Tell me a story. Before we go to the audience, I want to get this question in. What is your advice for nonprofits that don't have anything to do with COVID?
I can't imagine that we're not all affected by COVID, right? I mean, I sort of don't have anything to do with COVID, but we, when I heard that schools were closing last March, right, I realized that 94% of the kids in San Antonio School District are eligible for free lunch. And so closing schools means removing access to reliable meals for so many children. And so we put together a map to help families and kiddos know where they could pick up meals. Ultimately, we put together a map with 219 different locations in 19 school districts, no, 320 locations in 19 school districts. So we don't have anything to do with COVID, but we do. I mean, because all of us are affected by it. And so we're all affected in one way or another. I mean, if you are, one wonderful restaurant, many restaurants in town actually try to do some benefit for either meals for people who are food insecure or for other nonprofits. And that has to do with COVID. You know, it all, where it's kind of ankle bone connected to the
Right. Well, I have
T-bone.
plenty of more questions, but Michael, let's check. Does anyone in the audience have a question at this time? I can continue to fire away at Charlotte Ann, but
It
anybody?
doesn't look like it. If anyone
Okay.
has any questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box or raise your hands, and we'll.
Okay,
We'll get
Charlotte,
you before the
let's
ends.
continue with our dialogue now. When should you offer your CEO, your executive director, your board chair for an interview?
You know, it's a tough call. I mean, it really matters how involved your CEO is in the actual day-to-day. I mean, there are some CEOs really do believe that, and I think, I mean, that the executive director is the person who's out there on the front lines and is the one who should be doing that. When the CEO should be doing it, maybe has to do with fundraising for the organization. If you've got a big fundraising push going forward, then it's a good time for the CEO to be out there, because that's part of the board's function, right? Is fundraising as opposed to day-to-day operation. I mean, it's not. I think back, and there have been times when some CEOs that I've been familiar with thought that, you know, that it was their job to run the organization when the ED went on vacation, and you know, that's not it's not the role of the board member. So I think it's you have to be careful and make sure that it's in the, shall we say, in the lane of what the CEO's job is.
Okay, this is related. We're going to go to the audience in one moment, but I wanted to work it in. What if the media ask for your CEO, your executive director, your board chair, and I don't know how else to put it, they ain't good at giving interviews, okay? What are appropriate ways you think a director of communications can coach their leadership?
Yeah, that's really tough. And it's also tough because I'm thinking of, there are people in town who do interview people a lot, and even though it's a friendly interview, they're not really good at interviewing. The actual journalist is not very good at interviewing, and so it requires coaching even of effective people to go in front of that. I mean, I think you really have to plan ahead on that, and what is it we're trying to accomplish, and is this the best way to accomplish it? Right? I mean, really, what is it we're trying to accomplish, and is it the best way? I mean, it may be that if the ED executive director has no good media skills, or the chair has no good media skills, that you want to just kind of bring the news organization in to see how you deal with your clients. I mean, you know, let's aim them at program as opposed to at the talking heads, you know?
Is that called when you're media challenged, I guess?
I think
By the
so.
way,
I think so, but it also has to do with who is doing the interview, right? I mean, there are some people in town who would not pass my class in interviewing. I teach a 15-week class in interviewing to journalism students at Texas A&M San Antonio, and even really experienced folks have to be told how to deal with that before they go on that program.
Yeah.
I mean,
hey, Michael, I think I see a couple of questions. Do we have people who are on to type them in, or would they like to join us on camera?
So we've got a question from Al and a question from Veronica. They both typed in. So you want me to just go ahead and read those?
Let's start with Veronica.
Okay, so her question is, how far in advance should a press release or request for coverage be sent out? I've also been told to not send too early because it gets lost.
I hear you. I totally hear you. I personally appreciate a heads up, a heads up news release. And if you send that news release and it's a heads up, and you have, you know, one or two friendly folks that you know are probably likely to be looking out your way, follow that up with a phone call and say, I don't want to bug you, but I just want to make sure it doesn't slip. I mean, because, you know, I had more stuff slip out of my brain last year. I don't know about you, but
I don't know. It seems to steadily increase. By the way, did Al have a question?
Yes, Al's question was, what is your projection of the future of local newspapers? How long do you think the, I don't know if that's EX or X news will last?
the Express News.
Wait, Charlotte Ann, why don't we put you on the spot?
Oh yeah, I mean it's entirely up to newspapers how long they're going to last, and I'm not. I do have a strong opinion about it. I left to become online only in 1999 to become managing editor of TheStreet.com on Wall Street, and I did that from San Antonio. And at the time, people who worked at the Express News thought I was being kind of snitty when Pointer asked me why I left. I said I didn't want to become encased in amber. And you know, 20 years later, I'm still standing and doing well. And, you know, obviously that place is half the size that it was. It's entirely up to newspapers how long they last. If they continue to do what I think is like stupid on a stick, which is what the Express News is doing right now, and put all of their news behind a firewall so you don't even know how good it is and why you should pay for it, then, you know, they deserve a pretty short lifespan. On the other hand, I absolutely adore some of the people who work there, including Carrie Clack and Elaine Ayala and Vince Davis. And really, I wish for them, you know, a long and happy career. But that's not to say that a continuing series of management haven't done really, really profoundly stupid things from a business standpoint, including one of their moves not that long ago was to lay off their obituary writer. I mean, that was the most popular section in the newspaper, and for good reason. They were interesting stories, and newspapers first monetized it to a absolutely obscene degree, and now, you know, they laid off their obit writer. Well, you know, they deserve a short lifespan for those kinds of stupidities.
Yeah. Hey, let's pivot. We've been talking about working with the news media, and I made reference about being around for Thomas E. Dewey. Back in those days, there wasn't something called the social media. So let's talk a little bit that nonprofits can get their story out themselves directly working through social media. Let's take a minute or two to talk about that.
Yes, and it is true. I actually started at newspapers when there were manual typewriters in newsroom, and I didn't have the seniority for the electric typewriter. So I mean, just a true story. So social media is absolutely wonderful and glorious, and I think I think blogging, Twitter are just liberating to so many people. And I have a cartoon I use, and I will give it to you so you can release it with the slides, Jim. But I mean, we are all publishers now. We're all publishers. It's so amazing and it's wonderful. And so you can get out there and tell your story, and you don't have to depend on the newspaper to tell your story. You can get out there and tell it. And in fact, I think social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, and now TikTok, the San Antonio Zoo is on TikTok, and boy, I'm totally jealous. I have two of my interns like, guys, how are they doing this? We got to be there because we got to be doing that. And I mean, that conversation, that online conversation, that online game of volleyball. I mean, I don't know if any of you saw it, but last week when the snow kind of just came down on the East Coast, they started a museum snowball fight on Twitter. That was the hashtag. It was just fabulous, and every museum in the country got in on it, and they posted their best snow picture, and more people went to museums and saw museums as a really good thing because of this goofy, wonderful hashtag museum snowball fight. Well, I mean, we do that on Twitter. and it's not just for Giving Tuesday. Social media can be the most glorious place to get a cause up and to bounce it around the stratosphere, and to do it with a sense of humor and with, you know, to give us all something to smile about, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's a terrific advantage because it really does level the playing field. You don't have to depend on the big guys. You've got just as easy access to Twitter and to Instagram and to TikTok, yes, and to, you know, to do short videos, and it's okay if it's not perfect. That's the other thing. I mean, it's not, it doesn't have to be cinematic quality, you know. And
Hey,
yes, it's
before
okay if you're a cat in a courtroom.
we were talking before about how to deal with a CEO or an executive director or a board chair that thinks everything the nonprofit does is newsworthy. I don't know what I'm thinking, but so when is it appropriate to hold a news conference?
So a couple of different things. It's appropriate. I mean, if you want to hold a news conference about a ribbon cutting, you can do that. I think it's a tough sell, right? And it's a really tough sell right now because who wants to do in real life talking heads? If you want to hold a news conference, we just live streamed a news conference that I thought was actually super important a week ago. And it was a virtual news conference, and it was about 5 different organizations had done some research with using CARES Act funds into COVID, and this was a news conference about what the results of that research were. That was really interesting. I think sometimes those kinds of things are really good, but also it was streamed to Facebook Live and it was streamed to YouTube so that people who couldn't be there at that news conference could go pick that up later, and that video was available for TV stations to use later, very easily available to them to use later. So there are reasons to do it, but do it with accessibility in mind, with how can people, even who can't get there at 3 o'clock, go back and replay? How can people get their questions answered? So think about accessibility and also think about how they can incorporate that information into a story with the most ease.
I think Stephen's initial question was based on we didn't get covered. And I think anybody, can you say anybody in the communications business, be it corporate or nonprofit, not everything you do or suggest is going to be covered. That applies
Absolutely
universally. And how do you explain that to an executive director or a CEO who doesn't understand that?
I guess you have to tell them that you have to blame it on me. Go ahead and blame it on me. I mean, I blamed plenty of things on my editor when I was a reporter, but go ahead and blame it on me and just say, they need to understand that the resources are so way limited. I mean, particularly folks like the Express News, and they're the biggest game in town. They are the biggest game in town, right? Everybody else is smaller. And so there just aren't enough people to go around, and there's certainly not enough people to go around to cover things that don't jump out as unusual and to fit the definition of what is news, right? And news is what's unusual.
And by the way, even 50 years later, there's still a very, very important place for a well-written news release.
Absolutely.
And remind us again, news release, not press release, news release.
Absolutely.
Let's talk too about, can you talk about the human interest elements?
I think that what we all want is to put a human face on this situation. I mean, it's one thing to see the food lines, from the aerial photo of all the cars in the food lines, but it's another thing to to put an individual human face on all of this, and to put an individual human face onto the people who are solving this problem, or who are providing solutions, or as we call it, we have a special section at Nowcast SA dedicated to the helpers. You know, the Mr. Rogers line, whenever things get really scary, my mother always told me, look for the helpers. There are always helpers. I mean, those helpers are, the stories of the helpers are huge. That's individuals as well.
I'm guilty of asking, why is there airtight questions? But this is another big one. What goes into a winning lead?
Yeah, it has to grab you. So it either has to grab me because it's like, wow, I didn't realize, or it has to grab me because, oh, wow. Oh, so it needs to grab me. It needs to make me say, really, I have to keep on going. What is our attention span right now? It's less than a goldfish, right? So you have to put in there, without being clickbait, you have to put in that lead something that's going to make me read to the second sentence. And frankly, these days, people say, and I'm doing it, certainly doing it, my headline has to convince you to read the first paragraph, right? So it's not just the lead, it's the headline. And we really need to look at headlines and whether that headline is going to get picked up by SEO, whether that headline is going to get picked up, whether you're going to click through.
Hey, do you subscribe to the thinking that the headline should be the last thing you write?
Sometimes, but you know, the way I was severely potty trained at newspapers, and reporters wrote the stories, and then copy editors wrote the headlines, and that was because they had to fit into a prescribed space. You know, I mean, the headline might be 1 column wide and 4 long or whatever. So it is an art form to fit the headline into those spaces in the columns of a newspaper. But the copy editors always wrote the headlines. And these days, editors at news organizations write the headlines also because they are much more conscious of specific words that will get people's attention, or that will get search engines, and making sure that it has those, you know, the key words in it to get you to pay attention, but not being on the other side of the, you know, credibility wall.
You're talking about another strategy is for you to address a time of the year theme, a geographical theme, a holiday theme. Can you talk a little about?
So
yeah,
absolutely. I actually subscribe to U.S. Census Bureau press releases, right? And they come out with yeah, and they are press releases. They come out with information once a month that tells me, oh, this is the month of so and so. This is, you know, I mean, not as even much more arcane than just saying it's Black History Month and stuff like that. But those things do. I mean, we're all trying to be always trying to be sensitive to the fact that Black History Month is here, and we have a lot to offer about Black History Month. So if you have something that plays into that theme, that's really, really good. I mean, we have, you know, we have wonderful archival stuff of the Reverend Claude Black being interviewed by Carrie Clack, and the story behind the Carver Library, the original Carver Library, which still has carved over its original doorway that it was the colored library branch for San Antonio. And so, I mean, it's super important if you can blend your pitch in with something like that. The Lunar New Year is coming up, you know, I mean, we're all trying to be as inclusive as we possibly can in the media, and trying to pull in as many voices as possible. So anytime that you can, you know, help media, I mean, that's really one of my rules, you know, be helpful. Be helpful to these overworked, underpaid journalists.
Hey, listen, let's add to the list of no-nos. You wanted to tell your own story before someone else does. No comment doesn't cut it. Can you amplify.
Just a quick thing. I mean, human nature is that we believe the first person who told us something. And I used to tell this to PR people at Chevron when I was in San Francisco at the Examiner. And I said to them, if you got a leak somewhere and the first person who tells me about it is Greenpeace, you're in deep doo-doo because Greenpeace told me, hey, those guys have this horrible, horrible, horrible leak, and you've got a much more of an uphill road than if you said to me, we have a leak, we have it under control, it's contained, and blank, 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 and tell me the truth immediately.
Yeah.
Be the first or be sorry.
And that's really, we're talking about, it's so important that you have credibility with the media.
Right. And that works both ways, right? So before you go pitching a story to, who the Express News is, but there are other organizations, there are many other news organizations all over the world. Before you pitch a story to them, you need to find out, is this a credible news organization? Do they have a code of ethics? Mine is on my homepage. I mean, I make no, it's right there. And the About Us includes the fact that we have a corrections policy. If you can't find that code of ethics and the corrections policy at a news organization, don't talk to them. I mean, it's only going to cause you pain. By the same token, you need to make sure that you appear, you're obviously credible when that news organization goes and checks on you. So your 990s have to be posted clearly on your website. Your mission statement has to be posted clearly on your website, and your major funders have to be posted clearly on your website. Just as, with a news organization, you need to be able to find out who funds them too. I mean, my funders are listed on my website. My 990s are there, my code of ethics, and my corrections policy.
Yeah. Stephen expressed frustration. We couldn't get covered, but now we have this beautiful entity called social media. So again, nonprofits can take their message directly to the public.
Yes, and can I answer Neil's question real quick?
Please do.
Neil, your question is, what is the best way to get recognized as an expert in your area, apart from winning awards? I think being helpful, absolutely being helpful. And even if it's after the fact, if you see somebody who has written a story, pay attention to what people are writing about and tell them, hey, I might be able to help you out in this area. I'm getting some emails from UTSA Corporate Communications, and they are paying such close attention to the news. And they're like, if you are doing a story about blank, we have somebody at UTSA who has that expertise. And I'm like, I'm so grateful. I'm not picking up on them because those stories I haven't been doing, but I'm so grateful because they just say, we have somebody who is an expert in this area who would love to talk to you.
Right.
So you can do it, just be helpful.
By the way, and let's take a minute to cover your 3 big points here.
Oh, yes. Okay. So as I said, credibility and transparency matter, and that works both ways. So, just as the news organization you're dealing with has to show you that it's credible before you should deal with them, and you need to make it real obvious that you're credible and your 990s are out there, and so that a journalist doesn't have to work to find out you're legit. And the best thing you can possibly do for your nonprofit is to be helpful to an overworked journalist. And they will be grateful to you, even if you help them put a human face on the people who were experiencing homelessness or whatever, and then get to know the journalist work before you pitch them.
And by the way, being helpful might not result in immediate coverage.
Right. Right. It might not result in immediate coverage, but then you're there when they need you.
Right. Michael, do we have any other questions? And I'm going to sum up here. Do we have any other questions? We got about 1.5 minutes left here.
Nope, doesn't look like it.
Okay. You want to know, this is really something we say in fundraising, and probably it applies in media relations. To me, what is a relationship? I watched this movie at midnight and I heard a perfect definition. Relationship is something you have until something better comes along. So really in fundraising, and I think in media relations, you want to develop genuine friendships, and you're there you know, when you're proud of something your organization has done, and you're there when you have to explain something that your organization has done. And a broader theme here, by the way, I'm going to get one last question in. What do you think of nonprofits teaming up to make an announcement or present a story?
I think that's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's wonderful. You know, and I know none of us can do this work alone. I have really strategic and deep partnerships with the San Antonio Current, with the San Antonio Heron, and as often as possible with Texas Public Radio. I mean, we're friends. We work together in the local because none of us is big enough to do it by ourselves. And so when I see that there's partnerships out there among nonprofits as opposed to, you know, competitors, just, you know, in the old days, competitors at newspapers that didn't work out so well for the San Antonio Light or the late great Dallas Times Herald. And I think that's the same deal with nonprofits. Partnerships are the future.
Right. And I think I have a final quick question for you. Who's the only person in the history of the planet to perform a poem at both an inauguration and a Super Bowl?
And to have just, you know,
She's my hero. She's my hero.
Walked democracy, you know,
Yeah.
saved democracy.
Right. And, you know, her story and, you know, the name of her poem, Climb the Hill, in many ways, I think that's what we're all doing here in our nonprofit sector. We're climbing the hill because we have passion for climbing that hill, and we want to inspire donors about what their gifts will do and empowering us all to climb that hill. Charlotte Ann, I have a money back guarantee that I give to every webinar participant. Your chances of getting the gift go way up when you ask. I would like to thank, just not for tonight, but Charlotte Ann Lucas for since 2009. Nowcast SA has provided such an enormously important service, and never more so than right now. So thank you for the service and leadership you provide.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank all of you guys, because everybody in the nonprofit community, not everybody, but a whole lot of people in the nonprofit community helped this poor, simple journalist figure out what nonprofit was all about over the last 10 years, and we're still here.
Well, and thank you. And talking about social media, we're going to post a very succinct summary on LinkedIn and Facebook in probably about 3 minutes. And then Michael does his magic spin cycle, and then we are going to post the recording and slides of this on Facebook and LinkedIn. Probably, Mike, you know, between 6 and 6:30. So everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next Wednesday. And again, Charlotte Ann, mega thanks. Mega thanks.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.